Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to your first lesson of Social 30. I hope these videos work well for you. If you're having any trouble understanding what I say, if I don't speak loudly enough, or if I start speaking too fast, just let me know, okay, so that I can make the next videos better and easier to understand. Also, if you have any questions about the stuff that I'm saying in the videos, or if there's anything you don't understand, or if you just need me to explain something again, uh, that's good. That's okay. So just if that happens, pause the video and come speak to me in class during class. That way I can answer your question while everybody else is watching the video. Okay. So yeah, let's get into our first lesson. But before we do, let's go back in time to Social 10. In Social 10, this is the question that you would have been dealing with all semester. To what extent should we embrace globalization? So that semester was all about globalization. And then you moved on to Social 20. And Social 20 was all about this question. To what extent should we embrace nationalism? And now you've made it to the big leagues. You are now in Social 30. Congratulations. And in Social 30, the big question is going to be, to what extent should we embrace an ideology? By the way, I forgot to tell you, in my video, everything that is written in green, that is something that you can write down in your notes. Okay? So anything that is written in green, you write it down. Anything that is written in different colors, colors that are not green, including black, um, you can read it, but you don't need to write it down in your notes. Okay, so you can start off by writing this question. Okay. Also, I would like you to do a little soul searching, think about who you are as a person. You're going to do this personal questionnaire. Okay, so the title of the personal questionnaire is written in green, which means you can write that down in your notes. You do not need to write down all of these questions. I only want you to write down answers to the questions. Okay, these are not answers that you are going to need to share with anybody. Okay, you don't have to share your answers with other students. This is for your own notes for yourself. Okay, so some of these questions are fairly personal. Okay, and that's why you don't have to share with anybody. Okay, but it has to do with today's lesson. Okay, so you can just pause this lesson and write down your questions. Okay, so go ahead and pause now. Okay, welcome back. Well, I hope that you learned a lot about yourself and that you were able to write a lot of good, thoughtful answers down in your notes. Let's get into Unit 1. As you know, we have Unit 1 and then Unit 1, 2, or sorry, Unit 1 and then Unit 2A and then Unit 2B, Unit 3, and then Unit 4. So we have 5 different units in this course. And not surprisingly, we're going to start off with Unit 1. Okay, the title of Unit 1 is Ideologies. Let's start off with Lesson 1 of Unit 1, and the title is Individualism and Collectivism. So we're going to take a look at the differences between people who are individualists and people who are collectivists. And you might have guessed it, these are two different ideologies. So what is an ideology? Well, it's funny you should ask. I've got the answers for you. An ideology is a system of thought. An ideology is based on your beliefs and your values. An ideology is how I think the world should work, how I think society should function, and how people should interact with each other. An ideology is how I think people should live together in a society. So we live in societies, right? But not every society is the same. Different societies work in different ways, right? So Canada has embraced different ideologies than, let's say, North Korea. And North Korea has embraced different ideologies than, say, the United States. And that changes the way that people interact in their societies. So you probably noticed that I like to sometimes write my notes out sort of like this, in sort of these web, these mind webs, I guess you can call them. If you don't like to do it that way, you don't have to. If you prefer, you can write your own notes down in sort of the traditional way, more of like a title and then a list. And that is totally fine, okay? These are your notes. These are not my notes. So they are meant to be used by you. You're going to be using them for assignments, and you're going to be using them to read, to study. So you want to make sure that they are written in the way that works best for you. So you can do it this way, or you can do it this way. It's up to you. So ideologies focus on different things. Well, all ideologies try to explain the nature of humanity. So ideologies will try to explain who humans are. What kind of people are we? Are humans good or are humans bad? And whether you think humans are good or bad is going to determine the kind of ideology that you are going to embrace. Different ideologies have different interpretations of the past. So they will study history differently, and they will understand how history has created the present in different ways based on what kind of ideology you believe in. And all ideologies try to come up with a vision for the future, an idea of what the future should look like and where we should go as a human species and as a society and as a community. What should we try to create in our society? And different ideologies have different ideas about what the government should be doing in society. So some ideologies believe that the government should be very involved in society and should have a lot of control over people's lives, whereas other ideologies believe that the government should stay out of people's lives and should allow people to have a lot of freedom. So we're going to talk about some factors that influence ideologies. So there are different things that might, different things in your life that might determine the type of ideology that you believe in. Different things in your life that might shape what you think about human nature and shape how you think humans should live together in a society. So remember that personal questionnaire you did. I bet you remember it like it was just yesterday, right? So you wrote down answers to all these questions. Well, these words that are written in blue, these are all different factors that shape your identity and also shape your ideology. So depending on what kind of family you have, you're probably going to be influenced by your family. And they might influence your identity, but also influence your ideology. And the culture that you belong to might influence your ideology. The language or the languages that you speak might influence your ideology. Your sources of news, how you learn about the news, your gender, the religion that you are a part of, that is going to influence how you see the world and how you interact with the world. So we're going to make a list here. Different factors that influence ideologies. Number one, family. So the people that you grew up with, parents, grandparents, guardians, siblings, cousins, aunties, uncles, these people have an influence on you. They influence your beliefs and they influence your values. And in many ways, they shape you into the person that you become. And they also shape your ideology. They will influence your ideology. Also, the culture that you belong to. Different cultures have different traditions and beliefs and values. And by being part of a culture, you are going to act in certain ways, and you're probably going to believe certain things. And your culture is going to have a pretty big influence on your identity, but also on the way that you think society should function. For example, some cultures really emphasize the importance of sharing and community. And so you might become more of a collectivist, if you are a part of that culture. Whereas other cultures, for them, it's more important to have personal freedom and to have a little bit more independence from each other. And so that's going to influence your belief about ideology as well. Also, language. Different languages have different vocabularies and they have different ways of seeing the world and expressing themselves. And that's going to have an impact on who you are as a person, but it could also have an impact on your ideology. If you belong to a certain linguistic group, so a group of people who speak the same language as you, then you might become more part of that culture and take in more of their beliefs and their values. And that's going to shape your identity, but also shape the way you interact with society. Next would be the. So I hope that you follow the news, and I hope you follow the news through good, reputable news sources, good media companies. And the reason why I say that is because different media companies will often, not always, but often present the news in ways that have certain biases or biases. And and often media companies will present the information in a way that is meant to sort of lead you into believing a certain ideology. They'll try to sort of influence your ideology and get you to vote a certain way or to act a certain way or believe certain things about government. So two big media companies in the United States are Fox and CNN. And one criticism that's really, you know, uh, given to both of these media companies is that they will try to influence their viewers to think the way they think, right? So Fox News tends to be more conservative, CNN tends to be more liberal, and so many people will say, well, both those companies are trying to influence the way you think. And in Canada, we have a variety of news companies as well, such as HuffPost or CBC or National Post, and a lot of critics would say that, yeah, the same thing is happening here, although in my opinion, not as much, but still, usually you can find some sort of bias in all forms of media, and they're trying to influence your ideology. And so depending on which media company you are the most loyal to, it might change or affect the way you view government or view society. Also, relationship to land. So here you see some images of a farmer over here with this combine who's harvesting his crop. And then here you see some guys who are working in the oil industry. And so both of these industries are natural resource industries. And so a person who's a part of these industries will often have the mindset that our relationship to land is one in which our role is to um, profit off and extract natural resources for our own well-being as humans, right? And so that's going to impact the ideologies of these people. Whereas there are other people in the world who have a different relationship to the land, and they have more an approach which is more geared towards stewardship, an idea that we must try to preserve our planet and keep it the way it was when humans arrived in the planet, and we should try to conserve nature and keep it the way that it is. So different people have different relationships with the land in which we live, and that's going to affect the way they vote. It's going to affect the way they view government and how they think society should function. Another one is gender. So people of different genders often have sort of a tendency to vote a certain way, and to have different approaches to government and ideology. Neither one is religion or spirituality. A lot of people get their values and their beliefs from their religion and can be influenced by their religious leaders or their religious communities. And so their ideologies will be very much dependent on the religion that they follow. All right, so you guys are going to do a little personality test now. Okay, so you're going to read 20 different statements, 20 different sentences, and you're going to see that there is a blank space in each sentence. And you need to fill that blank space with one of these three words: often, sometimes, or rarely. You need to choose one of these three words to describe yourself in each of these situations. So I'm going to show all 20 of these statements, in the video. This is taken from page 7 of the 30-2 textbook. So if you happen to have that with you, then you can take a look yourself, or you can just follow this video. Either way is fine. Here are the first 5 sentences. I'm not going to read them to you. You can just pause the video and make it a list in your notes that looks a little bit something like this, where you have numbers 1 to 20. And then for each one, you just write down which of these 3 words you choose. So you read number 1. Okay, I think here the word often fills the blank the best for me. Number 2, probably rarely. Number 3, oh, that seems like sometimes. Okay, so you're choosing the correct word to fill in the blank space for each of these sentences, numbers 1 all the way down to 20. So here are the first 5. You can pause and you can choose the correct word. And then here are statements 6 to 10. Pause and write these down. Here are statements 11 to 15. And here are 16 to 20. Okay, so once you've done all 20 of these, and once you have completed, all 20 statements and you've written a word for each one, now what you can do is you can make yourself a little chart. So with 3 different columns, and you're going to write down the letters C and then a question mark and the letter I in the top part of the chart. I know it seems weird, but it'll make sense in a little bit. So go back to statement number 1. Did you choose the word often, sometimes, or rarely for that first statement? If you chose the word often, well then that corresponds to the letter C. So under the letter C in your little chart, mark down 1. If you chose sometimes, well then under the question marks, you add a little 1. If you chose rarely for number 1, well then under the letter I, you mark down a little 1. And then you move on to the second statement. All right, this time the word often correlated to the letter I. So if you chose often, then you mark down number 2, right? Or like you mark down, okay, I got the letter I once and I got the letter C once, so you go all the way through and mark down how many I's you got, how many C's you got, and how many question marks you got. And so you should have, a certain number of C's, a certain number of question marks, a certain number of I's at the end of the quiz. Okay, so these are for 1 to 5. These are for 6 to 10. These are for 11 to 15. These are for 16 to 20. Okay, so now that you've added those up, just sort of put that aside for a minute. We're going to come back to that little chart in like 30 seconds, and you're going to understand why we did that. So next thing to put in your notes is the ideological spectrum. So a spectrum is a fancy word for a line. Okay, in this case, it is a horizontal line. So draw this horizontal line under the title of ideological spectrum. Draw the line, and then on the right side of your spectrum, you can draw one person here by himself. And on the left side of your spectrum, you can draw a bunch of people together holding hands. So you might have guessed by now that on the right side of the spectrum, we have the ideology of individualism, and on the left side, we have collectivism. Okay, and as you might have guessed, your little chart here, if you had a lot of C's, if you chose the letter C many, many times, then that means you might be more of a collectivist. And if you chose the letter I a lot of times, you might be more of an individualist. If you have a mix of both, or if you have a lot of question marks, well, then you might not be sure whether you are a collectivist or an individualist, or you might just be a mix of both, which is definitely normal and natural. All right, so let's talk about individualism and collectivism by going through a few statements. I want you to think to yourself, which of these 2 statements do you agree with more? So on the left side of the spectrum, the group or the collective is important and more valuable than a single individual. Or individuals are important and entitled to make decisions. with which of these statements do you agree with more? If it's this one, well, then you might be a little bit more of a collectivist. If it's this one, you might be more of an individualist. So think to yourself, okay, which one of these is more correct? Okay. Here's another set of statements. It is important to contribute to the group, and it's important to be like the group. All right, is that one more true than this one? Individuals are unique. Which one is more true or more important to you? How about this one? The strength of the group relies on the contributions of everyone, and the individual may need to sacrifice. Do you agree with that? Or do you agree with this one? Individual effort is valued, and each individual person should be allowed to develop his or her potential. Which of those ones is more correct in your opinion? So, are you more of a collectivist or more of an individualist? Do you agree with this one? The group is stronger if it knows what its members think. And privacy is not a priority. So if you don't think privacy is that important, then you might be more of a collectivist. However, if you're an individualist, you might think that individuals have the right to privacy and the right to think freely. If you're more of a collectivist, you might think that the entire group is responsible for its members' actions. So you have to keep track of what everyone else in the group is doing, and nobody can be letting each other down. However, an individualist would say the individual, each person is responsible for his or her own actions, and you're not responsible for other people. You're only responsible for yourself. That's more of an individualist ideology. A collectivist would say the efforts of the group are more important, and individual efforts may not always be celebrated. That's not what's important here. What's more important is that the group succeeds and the group wins together. Whereas an individualist would say, well, the individual should take initiative and we should value personal achievements. So, what matters is when one person wins, we celebrate that one person. So with which of these statements do you agree with more? A collectivist would say cooperation is the best way to succeed. An individualist says, no, competition is better because it promotes excellence. Okay, which one's better? Cooperation or competition? Okay. A collectivist would say that the group is responsible for its members' well-being. So you are responsible for all other people in the group. Whereas an individualist would say, no, each individual person is responsible for themselves and taking care of themselves only. In a collectivist society, wealth is shared amongst people, and you don't have a lot of super rich people, but you also don't have a lot of super poor people. Whereas in an individualist society, what's more important is that you get to have your own money for yourself. You have private property, and your own individual wealth is valued and is important. In a collectivist society, the well-being of the entire group is more important than the individual rights of each person in that group. However, in an individualist society, the laws should protect individual rights, and the laws are there to protect individual people. So far, are you thinking, that you're more of a collectivist or you're more of an individualist? Which of these two ideologies do you support more? Well, it might be difficult to know right now whether you're more of a collectivist or an individualist. Maybe it will help if we look at the principles of collectivism and the principles of individualism. These are also known as values of collectivism and values of individualism. So there's a list of 6 of them, and then we toss in an extra 2 just for fun after that. But for individualism, there's an acronym. The acronym is PRICES. So the first one starts with the letter P, and that is private property. Second one starts with the letter R, and that is rule of law. By the way, you can be copying these down in your notes. The third one starts with the letter I, and it is individual rights and freedoms. Third one is competition. It's the fourth one. Economic freedom and self-interest. Okay. So these are the main principles or values of individualism. But then we also can add to them self-reliance and limited government. So have these written down. Now we're going to talk about each of these values, each of these principles, to try to understand them all. So the first most important thing that exists in an individualist society is private property, right? Private property, these are things that we get to own, that we get to keep for ourselves. So these are material possessions. They include land and other things as well. These are owned by an individual person or sometimes a group of people, or in this picture here, a couple of people. They might own them together. Right? So think about the country of Canada. Do we value private property? Is private property an important part of our society? Well, it definitely is. Okay, so does that mean we are more of an individualist society? Well, stay tuned. Next, we have the rule of law, right? So in an individualist society, the law is the most important thing, and nothing can be above the law. So an example of this is Magna Carta. You can tell from this image that there is a king who is sitting down and he's signing a legal document. Well, this legal document is called Magna Carta, and this happened in the year 1215 or 1215. And this king was sort of coerced, he was sort of forced by local leaders in his country to sit down and sign this law that stated that nobody in his country, the country of England, is above the law. Everybody has to follow the law. Even the king has to follow the law, the same law that everybody else has to follow. And so this idea of the rule of law has stayed with individualist societies ever since. Okay? So by signing this document, King John agreed that he was also subject to the law, and he had to follow the law too. So, according to the rule of law, the law itself, and not an individual, has the greatest power. All individuals are equal before the law and subject to the same law. So as you know, our Prime Minister in Canada is Justin Trudeau. And so if Justin Trudeau breaks into your house and steals your TV and steals some food out of your fridge, well, he can go to jail too, right? He is breaking the law if he does that. Just because he is the head of our government doesn't mean he's allowed to break the law. Nobody is above the law. And same thing with the police officer. If a police officer does something that is against the law, according to this principle of the rule of law, even the police officer should be, charged and persecuted or prosecuted in the same way that any other person would be. Next, we have individual rights and freedom. So can you guess, here in Canada, in what document are our rights and freedoms declared? Do you know the name? It is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. All right, so if you read through this Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as many of you have, you will see all of the rights that each Canadian citizen and resident is entitled to. If you go to the United States, they have their own version. It's called the Bill of Rights, and it's part of their Constitution as well. In the United Nations, we have something called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And these list the rights that are associated with personal liberty. These are things that you are already pretty familiar with. Things like freedom of religion, freedom of association, the right to life, the right to liberty, security of the person. These are lists of things that people cannot take away from you. You have them as rights, okay? And an individualist society values these individual rights, and they should be the same rights and the same freedoms for every person in society, no matter who you are. Next, we have competition. So why is competition an important part of an individualist society? Well, if you take a look at this picture here, it gives you the impression that these two cell phone companies are competing with each other, right? So here on the left, we have Samsung. On the right, we have Apple. And these two companies, they both want you to buy their phone. And so every year, they come out with a new phone or a few new phones where they make their product a little bit better. They improve a few things here and there. They maybe make the screen bigger, or they make the camera a little bit more clear, or they, I don't know, they do things, to make the phone faster. And so they want you to buy their phone. So they're competing with each other. And that means that we end up with, well, better phones, right? Can you imagine a world where these companies did not compete with each other and there was only one cell phone company in the whole world? Do you think that one cell phone company would try to make their phones really, really good? No, they wouldn't care because they would know that you could not buy a phone from anybody else. And so they could just make the same phone every year and they would never get better and everybody would continue to buy that same phone. So, according to an individualist, competition is a very good thing because we end up with better stuff. So, competition is an incentive for individuals and groups to work harder and more efficiently to earn your business. Next, we have economic freedom. So, as you probably know, the word economic has to do with money, right? So, this is freedom to do things with your money. Some of you might have a part-time job, or maybe you had a job over the summer. And when you worked that job, you were giving your talents, you were giving your time and your efforts. And in exchange, your employer was giving you money. You got to keep that money and you got to spend that money on whatever you want, right? It's your money. It's your private property now, right? And so that's the way society works in an individualist society. Individuals can act freely as consumers and producers in an economic system. You can buy things, you can sell things, you can take a look at the stuff, maybe the clothes you have in your closet, and you can think, you know what, I don't really wear this sweater very much anymore. And you can go on Facebook Marketplace or you can go on Kijiji and you can have a garage sale and you can sell your stuff to other people because it's yours. You have economic freedom in an individualist society. Next, we have self-interest. So if you act out of self-interest, who are you trying to take care of? Who are you trying to help? Well, yourself, right? It means you are seeking to satisfy your own needs. So this is important to an individualist. A person who believes in individualism thinks that each person in society should really just look out for themselves and they should really try to help themselves. And if everybody does that, well, then everybody's going to be well taken care of, right? And so what does this ideology think of human nature? Well, they think that humans are selfish and they think that that's okay. That's just who we are. Individualists believe that we are selfish, but we shouldn't discourage our selfishness because that is just part of our human nature. Instead, we should try to encourage people to act selfishly. And if they act selfishly, they're going to contribute more to society. So they believe that humans are like this. The world revolves around us. And we are motivated to help ourselves. So if I'm motivated to make a lot of money, what am I going to do? I'm going to work hard because I'm selfish and I want money. So I'm going to work hard so that I can get money. And if I'm working hard, I'm probably going to be very productive and do a lot of things that help other people. I might start a business and create products that people enjoy and make their lives better. Or I might work hard as a teacher and be the best teacher that I can possibly be, and that's going to help my students because I want to get a bonus or that those don't actually exist. But if they did, I probably worked really hard to try to get it, right? And by doing so, you do good things for other people. Okay, so People are motivated to work hard so we can earn a profit. And by working hard, we end up contributing positively to society. Next, we have, according to an individualist, all people should be self-reliant. People should not rely on others. They should take care of themselves. You shouldn't depend on other people for you to have success. You should get that success yourself. So there's a Canadian poet, and he wrote this interesting poem. And here's part of the poem. It goes like this. It goes, came up, that's all me. Stayed true, that's all me. No help, that's all me for real. And so the name of this poet is Drake. And he really shows this idea that, I don't rely on other people. I don't need other people to help me. I've, come all the way to where I am. I started at the bottom and now I'm here. And I did it by myself without the help of any other person. And so he exemplifies self-reliance. And that is an important individualist. Next, we have limited. So think about what governments do. Governments, they create the laws, they create the rules that we all have to live by. Governments will regulate businesses and make sure that businesses are following rules. Governments will provide us with healthcare. They build hospitals, they build schools, so they provide us with education. And so individualists believe that governments should not get too involved in society. Individualists, they don't really think governments do a very good job a lot of the time. They think that governments should remain very small and should be limited, and they should allow us to have a lot of freedoms. So individualists believe government should not be heavily involved in society. Instead, government should be small and allow us to have freedoms. All right, so those are the principles of individualism. All right, that's on the right side of the spectrum. So individualism is always on the right side of the spectrum. Collectivism is always on the left side of the spectrum. So for each of these principles, for each of these values of individualism, there is another value of collectivism that is sort of the opposite of that individualist value. So what do I mean by that? Well, here we have private property. What is the opposite of private property? Public property. Property that is not owned by individual people. Instead, it is owned by everybody. The opposite of rule of law would be adherence to social norms. The collectivist version of individual rights and freedoms is collective responsibility. The collectivist version of competition is, you guessed it, cooperation. Economic freedom? No. Collectivists instead believe in economic equality. Self-interest? No. People shouldn't act out of self-interest. Collectivists believe people should act out of collective interest and do what is right for the entire group. You can take a look at the other video that I've got in my YouTube channel. It's a video of a collectivist tribe. So this is a tribe that lives in a small island, and they've got a little village in this small island, the village of Motunui. And they live together in a very collectivist way. So what you can do is you can pause this video and go and watch that other video and then come back to this video once you're done that other video. Okay, so go ahead and pause. Welcome back. It's good to have you back. I hope you enjoyed watching that very real documentary of that collectivist tribe that lives in Polynesia, in the island of Motunui. So in case you didn't know, that's actually from the movie Moana. I tricked you. And so you probably saw that these people live together in a collectivist society. Here they are, they're working together. Do any of these people make a profit for themselves when they work? No. No money is made for each individual person. There's no private property. Instead, everything they make is for the community. There's a lot of collective responsibility too, right? Each of them has a job, right? Each of them has a role in their community, and they have to make sure that they're doing their job because other people are depending on them, and they need each other to help each other out. Is there a lot of individual freedom in this community? Well, no, not really, right? Because you see, if you've seen the movie, and if you haven't seen the movie, you got to see it. It's great. Moana, she's a bit of an individualist. Like she kind of wants to do her own thing. She wants to go and break some of the rules that the community has come up with. However, she lives in a very collectivist community that doesn't really like people to have their own ideas. They kind of want people to follow what the tribe says is best. All right, another example of a collectivist society. Early humans. All right, so um, 200,000 years ago, the human species evolved and we came to be. And we started off as humans living in small collectivist groups of roughly 100 to 150 people per group. And people really had specific roles within these groups. And cooperation was very, very important. In fact, a lot of scholars believe that that is really what has allowed our species to be so successful on this planet is our ability to cooperate with other people within our group. So some collectivists will look at this and say, well, collectivism is in our DNA. That's part of who we are. We are meant to live as collectivists because as a species, we evolved into collectivist groups. And so it just makes sense that we organize ourselves in the form of collectivism. Also, early Christians, they lived as collectivists. So when the religion was just starting out, there were some rich people who joined, there were some poor people who joined, and according to the Bible, they shared all things, and people ate together. And it didn't matter who you were before you joined the religion. You lived in a community now, and everyone was equal in the community. Indigenous societies and indigenous societies still today emphasize collectivism. And so indigenous societies, typically require the whole community to work together, and people have their own roles. Some people are in charge of hunting, some people are in charge of gathering. Um, the elders have their role. Their role is to educate the young and look after the children. And typically, indigenous societies have lived together as smaller communities, working together and cooperating. Still today in Canada, we have some examples of collectivist societies. For example, around Calgary, there are a number of Hutterite colonies. So Hutterites, these are people whose ancestors would have come here from Germany, and they are pretty, conservative Christian people, and they organize themselves in these colonies. And the colonies, they don't get too big. They stay pretty small, and everybody knows each other very well. A lot of them are family members with each other, and often you end up living with the same people your entire life, and nobody owns anything. So there is no private property. Everything is shared by the group. And there aren't too many positions of power. Some people have important positions within the community, but most people, they do the same work as everybody else. They're all working together towards the same goals. All right, so let's go through the values of collectivism. First, we have public property. So earlier we talked about private property. This is property that individual people get to have and keep for themselves. And we discussed the fact that in Canada, we have a lot of private property. But in Canada, do we also have public property? Well, public property is something that is owned by the state, owned by the community, owned by the province or the country. And it's managed by the government according to the best interests of the community. So forms of public property that exist in Canada would be things like the school that we are in right now, our national parks or our provincial parks, things like our hospitals. These are all public property, and they're not owned by individual people or companies, right? There's no such thing as a school that is owned by Google or a school that's owned by Amazon. No, instead, schools are owned by the entire province of Alberta, and we try to deliver education in the best way possible. Okay? So things like schools, police equipment, roads, parks, these are maintained by our taxes. So in a way, nobody really owns these things, but also in a way, everybody owns these things, right? We own them together, right? Because we pay for them when we pay taxes. That money goes to the government, and then the government uses that money to create these things with the goal of making life good for everybody. Next, we have adherence to social norms. All right, so this one's my favorite, mostly because my name is Norm. So I like the idea of everybody having to adhere to my rules, right? But in a collectivist society, people sort of follow these social rules, these unwritten rules. For example, if you're on the bus and someone comes in to the bus who has a physical handicap, well, what does the social norm say you should do? According to the social norm, you should stand up and make space for that person to make sure that they can sit towards the front, right? So this means that there's some social pressure that encourages people to follow certain societal. This can include things like respecting your elders, respecting older people, maybe don't call them older people, right? Standing up for the national anthem, standing up for prayer, getting up from your seat for the elderly, wearing a poppy for Remembrance Day, shaking your opponent's hand after a sports game. These are all social norms, things that you're sort of just expected to do. And in a collectivist society, you don't really break these social norms. These social norms are sort of what guide the community. So back to that clip from the movie Moana. Well, one of the social norms is that you don't go, sailing off into the ocean. You stay on the island and you stay close, right? And nobody really breaks that rule. Next, we have collective responsibility. This means holding the whole group responsible for the actions of individuals within the group. So again, going back to Moana, it's a great movie. In the movie, if you are, let's say you're in charge of climbing up the tree to get the coconuts, right? That'd be a fun job. Well, the community is really depending on you, right? And they really need you to make sure that you get lots of coconuts. So you are not just responsible for yourself, you are responsible towards your entire community. And if one person is not doing their job, well, then the whole community is going to suffer. That's different from in an individualist society. If one person doesn't do their job, well, that person's not going to make any money. That person's going to end up, living in the streets, and they're going to be homeless. But it's not going to affect other people. It's only going to affect that one person. But in a collectivist society, if that one person's not going and collecting the coconuts, well, then we're not going to have coconuts, right? It kind of hurts everybody, right? So we have collective responsibility. We're all responsible for each other in a collectivist society. One country that really takes that to the extreme is a country called North Korea. So here is a map of the world. There is North Korea in the Korean Peninsula in Asia. And here is their leader, Kim Jong-un. And so in North Korea, sadly, if one person does something that is against the law, it is not just that one person who gets prosecuted, but other people, like family members of that person or that person's friends, might also get in trouble. For example, we know that some people have left North Korea, but that is against the law. You are not allowed to leave North Korea. And so if somebody leaves North Korea, they escape the country, and the government finds out, well, then they will take members of that person's family and put them in slave labor camps as punishment for the actions of their family member who left the country, right? So that is collective responsibility. You're not just responsible for your own actions, but you may be held responsible for the actions of other people. And that is a more collectivist idea. Next, we have cooperation. So cooperation means that people work together, right? So instead of competing with each other in the economy, companies should work together towards a common goal, right? Teamwork makes the dream work, right? What's going to work? Teamwork, right? So these are all ways of saying that cooperation is a good thing. Next, we have economic equality, right? So instead of people having economic freedom, what we try to do in a collectivist society is promote equality among people. So instead of having some people be really rich and other people be really poor, a collectivist society tries to just kind of make sure everybody's doing okay. So society tries to narrow the gap between the rich and the poor. So they don't want anybody like this and anybody like this. They want everybody to be like these guys, right? And so how does a collectivist society make sure that this guy doesn't get too much money and that this guy gets some? Well, they have something called taxes. And so the more money you make, the more money you have to give to the government. And then the government uses that money to deliver programs and services and finds ways of helping out this guy and everybody else too, right? So economic equality can look different for different countries. For example, in places like Canada, people with larger incomes, they pay a higher tax percentage. This is called progressive taxation, and we'll talk about it more later. But the more money you make, the more money you pay in taxes. Next, we have collective interest. So these are goals that all members of a group pursue that benefit the whole. So can you think who these people are? They are all part of a collective that is called a union. We will learn about unions in this class. So basically, here's how a union works. Let's pretend that I am the boss of all of the employees, all right? And each person in this classroom is an employee of my company. And let's pretend that I start treating everybody really badly, okay? I'm not paying you very much money. I'm making you work really hard. The conditions of your workplace are not very safe. And so if one person individually comes up to me, one worker comes up to me and says, hey, you know, it would be really nice if you paid us more and if you treated us better, well, then I might say, ha, you are fired, get out of here because I'm mean. Well, something that you could do is you could gather together and form a union. And then together, collectively, you can approach me and you can say, hey, listen, boss, if you don't pay us more, and if you don't give us more vacations, and if you don't make this workplace safer, we're all going to stop working. And then you're not going to make any money. And so then I think to myself, oh no, I need my workers to keep working. If they all stop working, then I'm in trouble. I'm going to lose money. So I'm going to do what my workers want. I'm going to listen. So that's the idea behind a union. That's the idea behind collective interest, that together a group can work together and do what is best for the entire group. Okay, so on the right side, we have the principles of individualism. On the left side, the principles of collectivism. We're going to add a couple extra. Interdependence. Look at this heartwarming photo. This is definitely from before the coronavirus. And interdependence means that people depend on each other. It's the opposite of self-reliance. Okay? In a collectivist society, it's okay to depend on other people. It's okay to get help from other people. You don't need to do everything yourself. You can get help from others. And also, it's important that you help other people too in a collectivist society. Next, we have government intervention. Government intervention is something that people like. It's something that people enjoy in a collectivist society. For example, look at these guys who are working in this construction site. What are forms of government intervention in this photo? What are things that they are doing because the government is making them do it? Well, for example, they are wearing hard hats, right? The government makes rules that state that if you're working on a construction site, you have to wear certain safety equipment, such as a hard hat, or maybe a reflective vest, or you might have to wear gloves for this particular work site, or you might have to wear special boots that keep you safe, right? Like steel toe boots. They might have rules like everybody here needs to get a break every 2.5 hours, maybe, right? Everybody needs to be given a good lunch break. If people work overtime, they need to get paid more money because they worked overtime. Those are all rules government created. Those are all forms of government intervention. Do those forms of government intervention make our lives better? Well, if you're a collectivist, you would say, yes, I want the government to intervene because I think that makes my life better. If you're an individualist, you might say, no, government, stay out of my life. Okay, so the government is involved in a collectivist society, and it regulates people's lives, and it regulates the economy to promote health, security, and education. So there you have it. These are the two sets of principles. These are things like these two lists. We are going to talk about these things the entire semester. So you will always have this video to come back to so that you can sort of refresh your memory if you need it when we're learning about other things in the future. Okay. So now that you've taken all these notes and you've watched this video, wow, that was a long video. That was an hour. Now that you've done that, you should have a worksheet. If you don't, come and ask me for one. And the worksheet should look like this. Okay. So on one side of the worksheet, you have the values of individualism. On the other side of the worksheet, you have the values of collectivism. And they're all there. Here's what you need to do. You need to explain what this word or what this term means in your own words, and then explain why it's an important part of an individualist or an important part of a collectivist society. Okay, why is this a good thing? So for example, why do we want private property? Why is it good to have private property? And then give examples of private property making your life better, right? Next, the rule of law. First of all, what is the rule of law? Write that out in here. Next, why do we want to live in a society that protects the rule of law? Why does that make our lives better? That everyone has to follow the same rules, no matter who you are. Doesn't matter if you're rich or you're poor, you have to follow the same rules. Why is that good? And then give some examples of the rule of law in regular life and positive examples of the rule of law making life better in our society. What are our individual rights and freedoms? And why do they make life better? And then give some examples. Okay, so follow these steps for all of these values of individualism. Follow these steps for all the values of collectivism. You're going to hand this in to me. I'm not sure when. So whatever I say in person, in real life, go with that date. Okay. So yeah, get to work on that. Good luck. Come and ask me any questions that you might have.